Hello.
Hello, Stephen. It's John Frame here from Brisbane. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine.
It's, an immediately recognisable voice. How have you been?
Terrific, thank you. Very good. And how's it? It's morning where you are, isn't it?
Yeah, and getting to be quite hot. I saw in the news last night that you're melting in snow in Britain.
Yes, particularly in Scotland. I think they're having real trouble.
Right.
But it's fine here. Usual wet nonsense.
Fair enough. Is that your music in the background there, Stephen?
Sorry, no, that was just my computer restarting.
Right. I thought you might have had some extra service of music on hold even while you're talking.
I could provide some if you wanted, but I doubt it would be helpful.
You're happy with the nature of this program, of the queer radio program that I present?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yep. Great.
That's terrific.
Okay. And I believe that you're also not in the custom of doing this style of interview either. Not for just anybody.
Not for just anybody, no, but I'm stretching a point for you, as it were.
Very good. Okay. Now I have a range of questions that I've made out, and I've obviously written down far too many. But also one of the requirements for the station is we ask people if they can give us station IDs so that we can not only promote the people, as yourself, but also it makes us look better than we probably are. But we're a good station.
Such modesty.
Yeah, so at the end of the interview, if you don't mind, actually, before you run away, if I can get you to just say something like, "This is Stephen Fry, you're listening to Queer Radio, and this is 4ZZZ." Does that sound?
A pleasure.
Yeah, great.
Absolutely.
Good stuff. Okay, shall we start the interview?
Let's do it.
Stephen Fry, it's John Frame here from Queer Radio on 4ZZZ in Brisbane. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Very good indeed.
You're, of course, in London.
Yes.
And relaxing. It's not snowing in your area of the UK at the moment.
Just drizzling lightly, as usual, in London.
Fine. You're someone who's renowned for the quality of your voice, for your diction, for your elocution, etc. So it's very important to you. It's something that you've been doing since you were quite young. Like in your teenage years, you actually started to make a living by reading books and recording them.
That's right, yeah. Well, I think I grew up with a fairly kind of low sense of the value and quality of my physical self, so I had to concentrate on anything else I had that I could in some way feel proud of. I think that's partly it. Going to an English boarding school where the thing that ruled was rugby football, you just have to either play along or you're so kind of humiliated by being out of it that you find your own strengths. And for some reason, mine was always language, both in speaking and reading and writing, and that's the way I survived, really.
Right. I used to care for my nephew Scott, daycare for him each day at around his age 2, and I took him up to visit my Aunt Mary up the road one day, and I was proud of the way that he was progressing so well with his speech, and I was trying to help him as much as possible. But I said to him, "Show your Aunt Mary how well you can speak. Say anti-disestablishmentarianism." And he just looked at me and said, "What would I want to say a word like that for?" Which I thought was exactly the right answer.
That's a very good answer indeed. It's not every day that an occasion occurs when you can use it. Though, in fact, I have used it. It's quite an issue at the moment, disestablishmentarianism, and there are those who wish to disestablish the Church of England from being the state religion. So just the odd occasion you meet someone who says it's absurd that the Church of England is the state religion, I'd say, well, I don't know, I'm not really a disestablishmentarianist. I'm really more of an anti-disestablishmentarianist. And so you can feel really some kind of pleasure in using a word like that.
I'm sure.
Flocky-knocky nihilipilification was the word I most enjoyed using in my teenage.
Did anyone know what it meant?
Only nerds like me who read the Guinness Book of Records, where it was written as the longest English word, which wasn't a chemical word.
Right. Because there is power in words. There's power in the English language, but there's a Spike Milligan sketch from '61 called Word Power on his Milligan Preserved album, where his character has salvaged an old Webster's dictionary from the rubble of a building that's been blown up, and he's gone through life then just grabbing the words from the dictionary and impressing people with them, completely out of context.
That's very good. I mean, I must say it was one of the great pleasures of my youth was just simply reading a dictionary and finding absurd words, of which there are many in the English language, and dropping them into conversation. I mean, I was one of those irritating people who would do that, and schoolmasters would say, don't be clever. And I would say, all right, sir, how stupid would you like me to be? And that would get them even more annoyed. But words, I mean, word power is not a bad expression. I mean, there's no question that it's not power in the sense of power over other people. It's really power over oneself. I think if one is confident with language, it's a very good way to be more confident about oneself.
Mm-hmm.
Because people who find it difficult to express themselves, it's not really because they're thick or languages are desperate, lacking, and they're not sort of dyslexic or anything. I think it's much more a sense of self, and that while nobody likes a smart ass, particularly Australians, of course, don't like a smart ass. I've found, there is, I think, a real beauty in being able to express oneself well. A real. It's like its own kind of music, its own kind of ballet, really. Just the sound and crunch of words and the click of them on the tongue and the texture of them is something, the rhythm, something from which one can derive enormous pleasure. And it's an age which has become more and more kind of, Americanized, where basically kind of West Coast American likes and whatevers have taken over from any form of genuinely rich self-expression, and I think that's an enormous pity.
Fine. I particularly like the scene in the movie Wild, where Wild he's been chatting with these rugged young workers.
Yeah.
And he's obviously impressed by the fact that they're so innocent, and he's so sophisticated. And the contrast is really strong, but I love the smile that Wilde gives when he appreciates that it's another world.
Absolutely right, and in some ways he's the innocent, of course, and they're sophisticated. He's completely innocent about the world of, rough trade and male brothels and things like that, and is actually rather afraid, and he takes a kind of refuge in charming them with words. And I think that was a very strong part of Wilde, because he too felt very awkward about his physical appearance, and he loved beauty around him and so on. But on the other hand, he hated the fact that it reminded him of how he was, overweight, and he had terrible teeth. That actually came up in his trials because he used to hide his teeth with the back of his hand when he laughed, and that was a kind of proof of his effeminacy, according to the lawyers. In fact, it was just simply because he had terrible teeth. Some people use that as evidence that he had syphilis, so there's not really much credence attached to that by proper Wilde scholars, because the only cure for syphilis in those days, I say cure, was considered to be mercury. From Venus to Mercury, the phrase went.
Wow. Well, I had terrible teeth, and I can vouch for the fact I haven't had syphilis. But it's a lot to do with self-esteem. When I had my teeth fixed up, it made an awful lot of difference to how I felt about going about in the world. Yeah. And,
it does. As read Martin Amos's rather wonderful autobiography, which is all about his teeth, which we all mocked him for spending £500,000 on his teeth, whatever. When you read his autobiography, you realise the poor chap was in physical agony from his teeth, and that they were absolutely rotten in his mouth. I think things like that, it's very interesting. I mean, they're sort of psychological, really, aren't they? We all try and do what we can about ourselves. We can't necessarily make ourselves more beautiful physically, but we can do small little things like our teeth or just the way we talk. And in particular, I think when you're adolescent, these things, in the same way we practice our handwriting and our signatures, try and make them cooler, or even the way we walk, we sort of think, I'm going to walk with books carried in front of me with a slight swagger. And we're so self-conscious when we walk down the street, we think everyone's looking at us, and we've got a spring in our step when we pass old people because we feel so young, and all those things are a very important phase we all go through, I think.
Mm-hmm. A lot of the short pieces of the works that you do, say in Paperweight, which is also on audiobook, Paperweight 1 and 2, but the little vignettes that you say people can snack on, these comments, they're articles that you've written for newspapers, etc., but a lot of them have to do with altruistic morality. You're not wasting your time when you're writing. But
no, I think that's right. I mean, I would. It always sounds rather heavy to call oneself a moralist, but I think most people are moralists in the sense that what we celebrate is when we hear someone or we read something which seems to us to be on the side of the angels. it's as simple as that, really. You know, you just. I mean, there's an extraordinary act of arrogance about being a writer of any kind, and it's a kind of arrogance and it's a kind of modesty, paradoxically as well. It's the belief you have to have in order to be a writer of any kind, whether of journalism, good journalism, or of fiction, which is that your experience is that of others too, that it's not unique to you, and that however strange it might be, if you feel it, then others must have felt it. And I think that's what I tried to do when I was a journalist, is to assume that I wasn't a lone voice in just believing that small things, like what seem to be small things, are actually the most important in people's lives. You can talk about left and right in politics. You can talk about justice and what the Victorians used to, spell in capital letters, virtue and mercy and words like that. Justice with great capital letters, but actually it's small things, apparently small things like kindness, that really matter in the world. There's a wonderful story that I always treasure of a young undergraduate who gets his wonderful results and is elected to a junior fellowship of an Oxbridge college. I think it's Jesus in Cambridge, and this is about the turn of the last century. And as he arrives at the senior common room, there's an ancient old don who says, "Welcome, welcome, young man." He says, "A word of advice," he says, "don't try to be clever. We're all clever here. Only try to be kind, a little kind." I think that's a marvellous motto. Don't try to be clever, only try to be kind, a little kind. And it, as I say, it sounds like a still small voice next to all the great noisy words like justice and virtue and decency and morality and so on. But it's actually kindness, I think, that most moves us and is most needed. It's and I think that's the thing that in Paperweight, I suppose, is really the thing that I would get most enraged at, unkindness, and most in favour of things that were kind.
Yep. Your regular character, who appears also in Paperweight, Professor Trefusis, he's an eccentric, honest, and cognizant old man who's an expert on language. Can you see yourself perhaps having the same faculties and the same zest for life when you reach his age?
I would love it, I must say. I mean, I think there's nothing more appealing than I suppose it's a type, isn't it? From everything from kind of Father Brown to Doctor Who is an eccentric older person who still has a spring and a kind of irreverence, but a deep wisdom about them. And yes, God knows, I wouldn't care too much if my hair was all white or fell out or anything, but when we want one's marbles, that's all that matters. Really.
Absolutely. Your fourth novel, The Stars Tennis Balls, has been released simultaneously in hardcover and audiobook. And a couple of reviewers that I'd found online, and through QuickFry, the great website that services you, they were a bit pointed in saying that what they wanted was faster action and a more linear plot. But they'd still complimented you on your considerable verbal talents. So when critics make comments like that, how much do you take to heart?
I think on the one hand, you mustn't take it to heart. I think it's not a bad idea to take it to head. You have to have the judgment to try and separate your pride from your personal pride from your professional pride. If what someone says is actually right, you can't deny it to yourself. You can't get all huffy about it. So you, as I say, you let it go to your head and you sift it and you think, well, maybe they're right in that sense. And if you're confident that they're not right, you can say it. But of course, if it's personal, and then it's impossible not to get a bit miffed. To say the least. In the case of the Stars Tennis Balls, of course, I don't really mind because I cheerfully admit that I stole the plot for that. It's actually the plot of the Count of Monte Cristo, which is one of the great plots of all time. So I don't feel too bad about what any comment anyone makes about it. It's an updated version of it, and I don't feel too bad about stealing it either because Alexandre Dumas also stole the plot for his novel. So. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that for me the main experience of a novel is the language, because novels, unlike screenplays, for example, are made entirely of words. There's nothing else except words in them. When you write a screenplay, it's just the floor plan, as it were, something where someone else is going to choose the colour of the curtains and someone else is going to choose the furniture and the light fittings and everything else, and you've just done an outline. The film is actually what the screenplay results in, and that's made of actors, and it's made of light, and it's made of music, and all kinds of other things. Whereas a novel is only the words you write down. There's nothing else to mediate except the typeface on the paper and the style of it. That's it. And so people, when they read, are engaged at a very deep level with language, and you're making your whole world out of language. And plot as such, there are great novels whose plots you could say are nugatory, to say the least. Use a nice word, nugatory, like Ulysses, which takes place in one day, and what actually happens. An old man wanders around Dublin, gets into a few scrapes, meets a younger man, and his wife, meanwhile, who's been betraying him, ends up thinking that maybe she likes him after all. That's about it. That's the plot of perhaps the greatest novel of them all. And what turns one back and back and back and back to it, to read it again and again and again, is the language and the world that opens up in every sentence like some beautiful flower, in my view.
Right. Well, hopefully there's that in the Stars tennis balls as well.
I
expect there is.
Wouldn't make such extravagant claims as to call it Ulysses, but like Ulysses, it's also based on what you might call a classic tale.
Right. There was a famous and celebrated but late Australian writer, Patrick White.
Indeed, famous old bitch, yeah.
And I heard recently on ABC National Radio, they were talking about an Australian poet who was also a critic, a literary critic. And he apparently commented about one of Patrick White's books. Apparently throughout the article, the critic actually said he quite liked it, but he also described it as being literary sludge. And apparently Patrick White went to his death totally upset about it. Like, it upset him every day to think that somebody had said that about his work.
Yes. Well, he was, when I said famous bitch, I didn't mean that in a bad way. He was a truly great novelist. I think Voss is one of the great novels of the last century. But I think there's no doubt that literary Australia was a pretty small place in those days, and everybody knew each other, and it was much less multicultural than it is now. So it really was, it was a handful of people, the famous people who did that wonderful literary hoax where they invented a 20th century poet, do you remember, and sent samples of his work. Who were those two? Do you remember that great Australian literary hoax?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, you must find out about it. It's absolutely wonderful. These two rather, it has to be said, old-fashioned Australian poets who hated modern poetry, anything post T.S. Eliot. And they said, they thought it was all rubbish, much as people might, decry modern art and say, a child of 5 could do this. And so they wrote cod modern poetry in the style of Eliot and After and Pound and that sort of, modernism with a capital M, and sent it off to magazines. And suddenly everyone was talking about this extraordinarily brave new voice, this thrilling, urgent and vibrant young Australian poet. And it was actually just these two critics and poets who wrote rhyming poetry who were thoroughly pissed off with modernism. But I think they were friends of Patrick White, actually. So I mean, I've always, as I say, enjoyed White, but I know that he in particular was famous for his rather frosty bitchiness, a bit of an old, bit of a cold old queen. We know the type, and I suspect it was partly because he was really, for a time, the only internationally famous Australian novelist. And he veered between being extremely proud of that and extremely kind of feeling like a stranger in his own land, that he was more admired in Europe than he was in his own country, which was, at that time, I suppose, more in the grip of the ochre mentality.
Yeah. The audio extract that I've heard on the Guardian website from the Stars tennis balls, I was listening to it and I'm thinking it sounds like a perfectly charming and very bold love letter from one starstruck boy to another. And then when I read the text, I realised it's a boy-girl situation.
Well, it's a strange thing if you're a gay writer, because there is this thing called gay fiction. You can get published by the gay imprint of a publishing company, and you're on the queer fiction table, and it's a nice enough ghetto to be in, but obviously one wants to reach as broad an audience as possible, and I was kind of assume, and it's an arrogant assumption, of course, that one takes one's gay audience with one. That's to say that I know a lot of young gay readers who started reading my books and connected with them or whatever. They're likely to read a book whether or not it's got a gay theme. But on the other hand, if all your books feature an entirely gay story, the chances are you can turn off a lot of women and a lot of straight men simply because they think, oh God, not another one, you know. And of course, like E.M. Forster, you think boys when you write girl. There's no way out of that. You try and make a girl as real as a female as you can, of course. But when it comes to love letters and expressions of love, you just use your own experience, which of course is same sex in my case. And so I can't, pretend to know what it's like to know exactly how.
You're right there, Steve.
Hello. What was that?
It's
exciting,
interesting.
Right? Except from the experience of reading other literature, of course, and that's pretty vast. The world of heterosexual literature is enormous, so one can get some experience of that.
Right. In terms of like modern and controversial literature, I was looking at one of my aunties had left a copy of Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita at our place, and it's just holding together. But he's written an afterword in this version that was printed in 61. But on the 12th of November 56, he writes that his novel Lolita was his tribute to the beauty of the English language. And he was responding to those people who thought it was just erotica by saying that my novel does contain various allusions to the physiological urgings of a pervert is quite true.
Yeah.
But, after all, we're not children, not illiterate juvenile delinquents, not English public school boys who, after a night of homosexual romps, have to endure the paradox of reading the ancients in expurgated versions.
So right. I mean, that was absolutely the way. In certainly in 56 and 61, and of course Lolita is a novel of obsession, and the fact that it happens to be a man's obsession for an underage girl, of course enraged some people. You could say the same of Death in Venice, where Tadzio is a young boy, beautiful young boy that an old German writer falls for. But its beauty is the point, and it's the very unattainability, the de facto unattainability of an underage child, which makes those so much more lyrical and so much more lasting, because it's not that they are actually perverts, and in fact it's a shame Nabokov wanted to call Humbert a pervert. It's that he yearned after a beauty that was by definition unattainable. That even if he takes Lolita to bed, of course, he's actually taking away the beauty that he found there in the first place. The very act of doing that takes away actually what he admires in her, and that's the great paradox of beauty. That to touch it is to defile it, like a butterfly. You desire it, but you put it in a killing bottle, and it's no longer a butterfly. It's the movement of the butterfly that's part of its beauty, not just the colour of its wings. And it's the same with Tadzio, and it's the same with Lolita. And I think those two of the greatest stories ever told, aren't they? Death in Venice and Lolita. And there's no question that they are classics, and that the great moral majority, which as someone once pointed out is neither moral nor a majority, may well moan about these things, and it is obviously a great taboo whenever you talk about these things nowadays. Much more than it was, interestingly enough. I mean, there are books like Michael Davis's The World, The Flesh and Myself, which could never be published now. He was a respected Sunday Times journalist from England he wrote an autobiography in the 60s about his travels around the world and the number of boys he bedded. And it makes extraordinary reading. And I think its first sentence is, this is the story of a lover of boys. And if you wrote that now, because some of them were what we would call underage, some were 16, 15, it would be, he would be considered the dirtiest kind of sexual tourist who must be rounded up and shot and castrated and so on. In the 1960s, the book was published and reviewed in all the national papers as a fantastic and frank and interesting book of a remarkable civilized mind and so on. And it's interesting, we think of morality as loosening, and it's certainly true that acceptance of a gay lifestyle within the terms of that society laid down is much greater than it was, but certain things cause infinitely more problems, infinitely more questioning, infinitely more doubt than they did before.
Yep. In Moab is My Washpot, which is your autobiography, you quite clearly and very openly and honestly talk about your own experience, though, as a young man, being quite sexually active. And that's a refreshing thing to read a book in the first place where you don't have to read between the lines, and where you, as a reader, you feel a confidence that this is really what this person experienced and what he felt, because you don't keep anything back.
No, that's right. I try not to. One journalist, when it came out, said, talked about it being confessional. And I said, yes, it is in many ways. And he then talked about all the sexual parts. I said, no, those are not confessionals. He used the word confessional about those is to imply that there's something one wants to get off one's chest because one feels guilty about. There's confession and other things that I felt guilty about. Things where, being a thief and a liar and a cheat. I'm confessing to those. In terms of my sexual growth and activity, there are things I felt guilty about at the time, but I now do not feel in the least bit guilty about. And that's not confession. You use the word confession is already to make some admission of present guilt. I can only confess to something I feel guilty about. Yeah. I can't confess that I had a bowl of soup or a glass of milk, but I could confess that I jacked myself up with heroin, if you like. that might be something I might feel a bit guilty about. Yeah. And that's true of the sexual nature of the autobiography is something that I want to try and recreate the pain and unsureness and guilt and the overpowering nature of love that I felt at the time. And the whole adolescent schmear, as they would say. But on the other hand, I want also to make it clear that it's not something that is guilty. That the very act of being as candid as possible about it is a way of showing that one's absolutely at ease with who one is now, but that one recognizes the fight one went through. In a sense, you're writing for yourself. I'm writing back to myself when I was a 15-year-old, trying to look at that poor tortured individual. And indeed for other 15-year-olds who happen to read it, who might still be feeling tortured. I mean, life is easier, in a sense, for people now. There's the internet. There are things like your radio station and television programs and special channels and things. Magazines are plenty for young people growing up gay, which were just simply not available when I was 15. There was a library, and if you were an intelligent reader, you could find out all kinds of things through autobiographies, by connecting bibliographies, reading one biography, picking up a sort of hint of something and reading another and getting a sense that you weren't alone, but almost everybody you connected with was a dead English nant who'd gone off to live in Capri or something, and that seemed to be the only viable option. Otherwise, it was just a sort of grey world of dirty perverts in raincoats who hung around in libraries or public lavatories, and that's a scary prospect if you think that's going to be your future life. That either you escape into the sunshine of some forbidden Mediterranean or Eastern world where these things are allowed, or you're just a sort of dirty, sad old thing, clustering together with no celebration. And that was the youth that my generation faced. But fortunately, some of us were brave enough to, those of just a few years older than me, were brave enough to be part of that generation of Stonewall in New York in America, and the gay pride movement as it then was in Europe. And I'm sure in Oz too, and things open up, and a whole generation has them to thank. It is on their courage that people are now able to hold their heads up high and dance and sing along at the Mardi Gras at Sydney and all the other sort of things that make being gay not just acceptable, but a great pleasure. Something in which one could be so proud and think, thank God I wasn't born straight. I often had to say, I remember being born and slipping out of my mother and looking back up and saying, well, that's the last time I'm ever going up one of those. And I think that's more or less true, And so the pleasure and pride one can take in being gay, I think is, comes out of that sort of era of people who responded to the whole vibration of the age in the 60s and the early 70s when other barriers were being broken, and I just hope your younger listeners they see an old gay person in a bar or something, instead of thinking, oh, he's too old for me, don't like him, just kind of pat him on the back and thank him for helping the world be a better place.
The last couple of years have seen, sort of in the United States and a couple of places here, like there's a young man who helps with our show, Tim, who's keen to set up a gay-straight alliance group. This is just a student group at a tough high school in Brisbane at Marsden. Do you think that if a gay-straight alliance group had existed at Uppingham, that it would have changed your life at school, and would you have joined?
Yeah, probably I would. I mean, of course, the very word didn't exist in those days. It was, and that it argues a politicism which just didn't exist in sexuality in those days. There was no such idea. I think what one would have value was just the sense of not being alone. The fact, one would have valued some of the wit and relaxation that's present in the whole queer world now these days, and that's the thing that makes life easier. So that basically it's rather cool to be gay. That's the thing. Mm-hmm. So that although of course people do shout faggot in the schoolyard, in the playground, and there is still bullying and there is still victimization, it's so much rarer. And if a gay straight alliance can help make it cooler to be gay, so that someone who shouts faggot just looks stupid, just looks like complete 10 types of arse, what, it's just that's the thing. Because yes, I mean I'm sure there are tough schools. I'm sure in Australia, one thinks of Australia, of course, in England, in a sort of rather hazy way as this perfectly multicultural, perfectly balanced society. But I'm sure it has all kinds of problems, like every other kind of country. I know you've got some strange political woman who seems to be a bit sort of on the right wing side, and it's not all heaven in Oz, but and that's probably true in most of the so-called Western world, that there's a kind of mixture, of. I mean, America is more extreme than anywhere, isn't it? I mean, you've got San Francisco on the one hand, but then you've got everything below the Bible Belt being just almost unbelievably foul, and it's a very strange thing. And anything that stops too much ghettoization, I think, is a good idea. I mean, if people want to live amongst their own kind, there's nothing wrong with it at all. But if they feel they can only do that, which is part of the problem in America, you can only live really in San Francisco or Chicago or Los Angeles, New York, or some of the bigger cities. You can only live there, in a sort of ghetto. But what you can't do is live in Wilmington, North Carolina, or Birmingham, Alabama, or Pensacola or whatever, and be that kind of easy and proud. And I think that's a shame. So if gay straight alliances help with that, then I think it's a very good thing.
Certainly. I've reported at the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras for 4ZZZ for the last several years.
Yeah.
And last year was the first time that there's been a major entry by a Jewish group, and it was called The Stars of David Come Out. I spoke to one man who came from Johannesburg, and he has never marched in a gay pride parade in Johannesburg, but he came to Sydney and marched in the Mardi Gras parade with other gay and lesbian Jewish people from around the world, and that would have been a hugely moving experience.
I bet it was, yeah. I bet it was. Well, it's a very odd thing there's something about the Sydney Mardi Gras, isn't it? I mean, I know people who go to Sydney just to be in the Mardi Gras, and from Britain, it's a hell of a lot of money, it's a hell of a lot of miles to go, when there is London has its Pride weekend and marches and things, and free concerts in the park in London, and it's a big event, and thousands turn up, and it's, very good, and well attended, and, rock stars come and perform free gigs and things. But there's something about the Sydney Mardi Gras that seems to attract people who don't feel as comfortable marching in their own country, and I think it's somehow there's a kind of just a feeling of license and freedom about the very words, and people think, yes, you can be yourself, and you can be there, really absolutely let it all hang out. And I think particularly, of course, yes, Jewish people is very, very. I mean, I grew up in a Jewish family in the sense my mother's Jewish, but my father isn't. But it's, as you know, with the Jews, it's the mother that counts in every sense. But it's and it's very difficult. There are some very Orthodox Jewish families who cannot accept gayness at all in any way, and they really reject their children.
You have a broad appreciation of music, and I've seen references in your pieces to, say, from Elvis Costello right through to the classics. But Vivian Stanshall and the Neil Innes's Bonzo Dog Band particularly impressed you, and they're one of my favourite bands as well. What do you like about them?
Well, I think it was that I wasn't a cool rocker. I was around at the time in which things like Pink Floyd and what was called progressive rock were the really big things at school, and they were just a bit too kind of heavy and overblown for my taste. But I loved the Bonzos because their wit. I mean, they were very, very funny. They were musically very good and incredibly eclectic, all kinds of styles, from jazz to fantastic parodies of all sorts of music. And Vivian Stanshall had this surrealist, sort of Dadaist sense of humour, really, quite extraordinary, which was founded on, again, a huge influence on me, on a marvellous voice, the most extraordinary voice. It was like rich gravy pouring out of a jug, it was just marvellous. It was, if you could embody the sound of old wireless valves of the 1940s, glowing orange with a slight dusty smell from a Bakelite wireless with a sort of sunburst on front of the speaker, and it takes 3 minutes to warm up when you turn it on, and then you get a very clear English voice coming out of it. And that's the sort of voice he had. And it was just marvellous to have such surreal and extraordinary humour coming out of that totally British sound. I mean, it was that mixture that, of course, then led to Monty Python. He was a huge influence on them, and in fact Neil Innes, the other major member of the Bonzos, wrote most of the music for the Pythons, the music that Eric Idle himself didn't write, all the stuff for Monty Python and the Holy Grail and songs like that.
Certainly.
And, so, I think that was a very, very formative thing, the fact that you could be quirky and surreal and eccentric and bizarre within the cloak of being incredibly English. It's, as it were, it's part of the English thing, but I think, Australians share it too, that, as it were, if you're wearing a punk clothes and you fart, it isn't funny or interesting. If you're wearing a tweed suit and you fart, it's somehow funny, if you see what I mean. And that's a very, very typical thing about Britain. That if you really imitate the manners of the establishment, but are then strangely eccentric or satirical, you can get away with it. I remember Ben Elton, who's a kind of honorary Australian, as I'm sure you know, that spends a lot of time living in Australia and has an Australian wife. And I remember Ben saying to me that it was completely unfair that he was always getting letters and complaints for his language on television, when in fact he goes out of his way not to swear. He says flippin' heck and things like that. But somehow, and I can get away with, I think I still, it's in paperweight actually, I think I still hold the record for saying fuck on British television the most times in the shortest number of seconds, as it were. I said it's about 70 times in a minute and a half. I mean, there was a point to it. It was actually an interview program, and I was talking about censorship and about, just about the use of the word and where it came from and so on. And it didn't get a single complaint. And I think it's because of my voice and manner, whereas poor old Ben just has to say flippin' heck, and because he's got a sort of sub-Cockney manner, and people, for some reason find him, like a sort of Jack Russell yammering at their ankles. They get very upset and annoyed by him. And I think that's it's a classic English thing, that if you do it in a sort of strangely fuddy-duddy style, people find it more acceptable.
Right. Things are moving ahead in Britain in terms of progressive attitudes and law reform for gay men and lesbians, but especially recently with the Blair government pushing through the age of consent and equalising that at 16. That's wonderful, but other things are happening, like watching the replay of the last night of the proms, and every time they went back to the crowd at Centenary Square, here's this big rainbow flag being waved in the middle of the crowd, which I thought was a nice touch. Very odd,
yeah. I mean, that's always going to be the way with Britain. Things happen very, very slowly, and you hope at best to take maybe 3 steps forward and 2 back every time. And it can be achingly frustrating, and one can rage against it as much as you like, but unless one realises that it has always been that way, revolution has never worked in Britain. It's always been just slow little drip, 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 and eventually people get the point and they change, and they, 5 years later you can't remember why it was that they made such a fuss about it. The age of consent, there were people screaming that it was a charter for perverts, and that the whole fabric of civilization would come crashing down about our ears. But now, I dare say it's more or less accepted. There is still a terrible stain in our statute book, which is a ridiculous thing called Section 28 of the Education Act, in which it is against the law to promote homosexuality, whatever that means. That's what it was a thing that came in under the Thatcher government, which was supposed to be a poo in the face of what they perceived as PC kind of attitudes, in which teachers would explain gay lifestyles to their classes, and they said it should be illegal for them to promote it as normal. But of course, not a single conviction has been brought under this ludicrous act. But time and time again, the House of Commons has voted to repeal it since Tony Blair came to power. But some of the more ludicrous dinosaurs in the House of Lords, particularly one Baroness Simon, I think, is that her name? Something like that. Ghastly woman, has fought against it being repealed, and so it stays on our statute books as one of the most absurd pieces of legislation ever to stay in a statute book. But generally speaking, things are better. Yes, I mean, at least there is a civilized norm about the age of consent. just being the same. The fact is, you just don't need the word gay anywhere in a in a constitution or on statute books. You just simply say, if people are married, and you can recognise a common law marriage in English law. If it's a man and a woman, you do gay marriage too. If they're married, then they have these rights, and if they're not, they don't, and so on. And because so often justice comes down to small things like two gay people living together, and they might each have a car, and do they get a local parking permit? They can only get it for one car, because a married couple can have it for two, but not two gay people. And it sounds like such a small thing, but it's a kind of humiliation. It's a kind of we still don't really count. We're still not really recognised, and it's just getting those sort of things right. And actually, that's where the actor Ian McKellen and his group Stonewall, which was named after the American events in 1969. Are terrific, because they don't make a huge fuss about it in great political ways and throw stones and throw dog turds through the window of number 10 Downing Street. They actually sit down very quietly and have meetings with politicians and just badger away quietly and in a kind of grown-up way, and that's what gets results.
Last year saw the first National Coming Out Day in the UK, organised by the group National Friend, and I spoke to Ian, the man who heads that group. And it's such an important thing to make people realise that there is support out there. A piece from Paperweight has you referring to a Star Trek show that particularly impressed you. Yeah.
Oh yes, was that somewhere out there someone is saying the three most beautiful words in the universe? Mm-hmm. Is it that one? And of course you expect it to be I love you, and Kirk turns to Bones and says, it's please help me. And they are. Those are the most beautiful words in the universe, please help me. And yes, you're right, there's support all over the place. I mean, I've never been a believer that people should be forced out, or that people should be, criticised for not being out, because you never know other people's circumstances. You don't know what their parents are like. You may say, well, why hasn't so-and-so come out? Everyone knows he's gay. You say, well, actually, if you've met his parents, and you'd know it would kill them. They're 80. He's just waiting for them to die or something. So I think it can be extremely irresponsible to force someone out, because, especially a famous person, because there are enormous consequences, which have got to be thought through. But I think to encourage people to believe that there is huge support, and that there's not just a feeling of relief that you've managed to come out, but a genuine sense of joy that you've actually shed an enormous burden, and it's like losing this huge amount of weight, and you suddenly walk upright and think, God, I've been carrying all this around with me. I didn't know life could be so much simpler, so much prouder and so much happier. And I think that's the important thing, is to show people that that they can be helped through that, and because you can never know other people's lives and other people's circumstances, and it may be easy for one person because their parents are like this, or they don't give a toss about their parents. They just say, well, if they can't take it, sod them, and never speak to them again. But other people may have more complex views about it and don't want to. But it's I think people are so much better about it, and of course it's also about how other people receive it. And in fact, most people these days, whether they're a welder or they work in show business, they actually their views they couldn't give us stuff. Oh, you've come out. Oh, right, great. Well, frankly, I don't care that much, but good for you. They're not going to go, ooh, God, that's the biggest news I've ever heard. Again, partly it's this sort of silly thing of it would be so uncool to be really fazed by it. Only severely. I mean, I think people are sophisticated enough now in almost all walks of life to know that if they get upset by someone else being gay, most people will go, why is he so upset about him being gay? Do you think there must be something about himself? You know what I mean? I think most people are aware of that.
Yeah. So, you are to host the British Academy Awards on the 25th of February, which must be an exciting moment for you. And
yes, I think it's good. I mean, in the past, it's a great evening, and I've sort of gone on and said, and the winner is, before many times, and I've been asked a couple of times to do it, and I've always said no, because in the past it's always been held in a gigantic Grosvenor House, which is a hotel in Park Lane, in a sort of great sort of thing there, and so therefore half the people you talk to have got their backs to you because they're eating, whereas now they very sensibly do the award ceremony in a cinema, and then have the great big party afterwards in the hotel. So it's more like, as they do with the Oscars, you get everybody sitting and facing the right way, and then you can crack through it, and one hopes it's more fun. They've also moved the ceremony now, so it's before the Oscars. It used to happen in April, after the Academy Awards. So it was all rather kind of sort of flat nothing, really, because let's face it, the pinnacle of the award season, such as it is from January to the end of March, is obviously the Academy Awards, and for BAFTA to have their awards afterwards was rather a waste of time. So now that they're before, A, there's a lot more American interest because it's more of an indication as to who might or might not win an Academy Award, so they seem more important, and B, there's just, kind of greater attention paid to them by everybody else. So it's just, it kind of dignifies them and also allows the Oscar to take their place as the prime event of the year.
Mm. It's been encouraging for me just in the last year or two. It's just so refreshing to see the Academy Awards or the British Academy Awards and see recipients of awards proudly acknowledge their same-sex partner. And it seems to be happening more often. And again, it doesn't rate a mention in the news. But I think that's a really important move. But will your partner be coming as your guest to the awards?
He certainly will, yeah. Yeah, absolutely, yes. Yeah, he comes with me just about everywhere, and the press are actually great about that they know he's a shy chap and doesn't want to be plastered all over the newspapers, but on the other hand, we don't, it's not a question of hiding as if we're ashamed of anything or anything like that, because it's a difficult balance to walk in terms of these, in terms of the public perception of these things. It's just the same for a wife of a famous person or a husband of a famous woman. Is that, on the one hand, you don't want to look like you're camera greedy yourself, and you might be a shy person and you prefer not to be photographed, but that's not saying you're ashamed of the person you're with or that they're ashamed of you. And you just have to hope that the paparazzi are kind of aware of that. And fortunately, I'm on really reasonable terms with the actual photographers. You get to know the major ones, and so my partner can just kind of tends to hang back when arrives at a premiere or something like that. When the photographers absolutely leap forward, there are plenty of photographs of the two of us together as well. But they kind of respect that he doesn't want to be like, say, David Furnish, who obviously is much more professionally connected with Elton, and is a film producer and is in that business. My partner is not in show business, and is just rather shy of all that sort of stuff, which they respect.
Great. Billy Elliot's a film which will feature strongly at the BAFTA Awards.
Indeed.
So it struck a chord with you.
Yes, I mean, it struck a chord. It pressed all the right buttons. I think it's one of those films. If you're in the right mood, it absolutely strikes all the right buttons and strikes a chord. It's just one is dimly aware that one has seen it many times before in different shapes as a film. But on the other hand, it's so beautifully done. Particularly the performance of Jamie Bell as the young Billy Elliot is so good. You can't help but be generous towards it. I mean, it's. But like a lot of films, don't you find that if you're in the right mood for a film, you can just go, oh, it's great. And if you're in the wrong mood for it, you can just think, what a pile of toss. And it can be it can be the bane of your life when you make films to know that somehow you're at the mercy of mood enormously. And I was in just the right mood for it for some reason when I saw it, so I was awash with tears in the most ludicrous way when I watched it. Even though I knew I was watching, in some sense, a string of cliches, but they were beautifully done.
You would have seen similarities in your own life that you described in Moa Bisma Washpot. The fact that that your mother loved you intensely because of the actual pain that she went through when she saw you onto the train the first time.
Yes, that's right.
This happens with Billy when he's going off to dance academy.
That's absolutely true, absolutely right. And it's an answer to this, thing that people do now find it very strange that people can be sent off to a boarding school at the age of 7, as I was, and sent right away to the other side of the country, and they think, God, how can parents be so cruel? But if that's what your parents did, if it's what your brother does, if it's what all the friends of your age and dread word class, if that's what they all do, all the people you know, then you'd think it odder if you weren't sent away to school. You'd think, what's wrong with me? Why aren't I sent away from school like everyone else I know? I mean, that's not to justify the difference in the class system that you only know people who go to the same sort of school as you do. But you certainly don't think it cruel. And that's the last thing you think at that age. You just think it's the norm.
Yeah. The good thing for Billy Elliot, as a statement that it makes too, I think, is that when his father bursts into a room and he sees Billy dancing with another boy in a tutu, rather than panic and make a homosexual attack, he takes his son as being honest, courageous, and dedicated to his art, and supports him on that basis.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, that is so good, that, and I indeed.
The movie Wild has just been released in all its glory on DVD in Britain.
Oh, right, yes, right, yes.
And I have a copy here at home, and it's beautiful to see it in widescreen with surround sound and rich colours. So that was a film that also starred Vanessa Redgrave, did a great job, and she's been in so many wonderful films over the years.
Yeah, she's an extraordinary woman,
She was quoted recently in the press when they were talking about her receiving awards in America, that regarding her father, Michael Redgrave, and her husband, that they both had bisexual affairs.
Indeed, it's true, yeah.
And she said, well, that's just normal family life. And I think that our local paper wrote that as if, well, for her, that's normal family life.
It's a lot more common than people would like to think. But yes, I mean, her father famously had a male lover who lived in a sort of cottage in the same house as Rachel Kempson, Michael Redgrave's wife. In the same grounds of their house, and he would, Michael would go and visit him. It was a most extraordinary. Colin Redgrave wrote a wonderful memoir of his father and the lover, and of course Tony Richardson, Vanessa's husband, who died of AIDS in Los Angeles about 10 years ago now. Was also, as she rightly said, lived a bisexual lifestyle. Yeah. So she was being absolutely honest, and it was what she was used to. And for her to say it was the norm for me is perfectly honest and right. It would have been dishonest for her not to say it. So for a newspaper to sneer as if that may be true for you, Vanessa, well, it is. It is true for her. And she's hardly the only one. Let's be honest.
That's right. Your family, your parents included, like your sister's your agent, which is wonderful. Yeah. But your parents must be really proud of how you've turned out, and considering like they've given you heaps of support, they've stood by you through your school years and the trouble you had when you were in jail and such as an 18-year-old.
That's right. I mean, I think what's nice is, what they say is that they're not. I mean, of course they're proud of some things I do, but what they're most proud of is what I am. I think. I think they're most proud of the fact that I'm happy, that I'm content, that they can think of me as a good person. It's not just simply because I'm, inverted commas, famous or have succeeded. And that in itself is not enough to make someone genuinely proud of someone else. I could have, written books that they thought were, not worthy of me, or come out with opinions that they thought were not worthy of me, or live a way that they thought was not worthy of me. But I think what they're proud of is much more the who I am than what I am, if you see what I mean. And I think that would be true of any parent, actually.
Yeah.
That's a testament to them. They're extraordinary people themselves.
That's great. You're one of several publicly cherished, proudly gay British celebrities, as Sir Ian McKellen, as you said before.
Yes. Serena McKellen, as I call her. Dear Serena.
So is that public acceptance something that you cherish as well?
Yes, there's no doubt. I mean, as I wrote in my autobiography, it's a strange thing, adolescence, and I think it's a thing that lingers through our whole lives, is that most of us, I think, have a part that absolutely yearns to belong to the tribe, and another part of us that yearns to be separate and distinct and individual. And I think that's particularly true of gay people, that on the one hand, we want to be accepted. On the other hand, we relish and celebrate our difference, and they can often tug us in two different directions. But I think to deny that one's need to feel accepted would be absurd, just as to deny one's need to feel different and part of a special group would be absurd. And I think that yes, it gives me enormous pleasure to know that everyone who says hello to me in the street in England also knows that I'm gay and that I have a gay lover, and that that doesn't affect their view of me. Makes me very proud of myself, but also of my country and how it's changed, and of how people can accept things that they used not to be able to. Mm-hmm. And that's a genuine pleasure, no question. It's
been a pleasure listening to all of your audiobooks. And the new book, of course, The Stars Tennis Balls, is available in both audiobook and hardcover. But I could thoroughly recommend any of the other works that you've done. And you've also done audiobooks of Winnie the Pooh and Harry Potter, yes, and a lot of the Wild works as well.
Yes, indeed.
So there's an awful lot of fry that people can go out there and grab. But it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and having a casual chat with us is an honour, and I know that this doesn't happen very often.
Well, it's been a delight to talk to you, and good luck to you and your splendid radio station and all your listeners. And I hope very soon to be in Australia. I was hoping to be here. My Oz and New Zealand publishers were hoping I might be able to make it in the spring this year, but unfortunately I can't because I'm doing a film over the spring. But I hope to be in Australia very soon because it's a country I love and haven't been to for about 12 years, I think. So I'd love to come and see you. So next time I'll promise I'll come and give a live interview when I'm in Australia.
Good on you, Stephen.
All right.
So Stephen Fry, thank you very much for speaking with us on Queer Radio here on 4ZZZ in Brisbane.
Thank you.
Give our love to your partner as well, please.
I will do. Thanks so much.
See you, Stephen.
All the best. Bye.
Bye.
Hello, it's Stephen Fry here on Queer Radio 4ZZZ, the queer radio station you like to snuggle up to most.